cultural force born from struggle, creativity, and resilience. But what if we told you that the industry profiting off of these stories might also be fueling the very struggles they portray? Today, we're uncovering the disturbing relationship between private prisons and the narratives pushed in hip-hop. Rap music is more than entertainment. It's often the voice of marginalized communities, a reflection of their struggles, dreams, and survival. But beneath the beats and lyrics lies a disturbing reality, an industry profiting off of these stories while fueling the very struggle it claims to represent. Let's start by looking at the role of private prisons. These corporations depend on high incarceration rates to thrive. Their profit margins rely on policies and practices that disproportionately targets Black communities that also form the central nervous system of hip-hop culture. Investment firms that own stake in private prisons are often the same ones backing major streaming services. This creates a hidden link between incarceration and the entertainment that hip-hop listeners consume. Music labels get to decide which artists to sign and which messages to amplify. While rap is incredibly diverse, the industry has a tendency to push narratives that glorify the street life, violence, and incarceration. These themes aren't accidental, they sell, and the cycle feeds itself. The promotion of these narratives can have a real-world consequence. For young listeners, the stories become aspirations, often leading to decisions that increase their likelihood of encountering the justice system early. The prison industrial complex profits from this pipeline. Why do these narratives dominate? And it seems that they dominate because they serve a systemic interest. By glamorizing criminal behavior, the music industry gets to keep listeners focused on survival stories instead of their God-given right to freedom. The result is a culture that normalizes struggle and devalues success outside of the streets or from behind the fence. Even though there are artists that do prove that rap music can be influential, the industry heavily favors content that aligns with these harmful stereotypes. One way to break this cycle is through ownership. Artists are increasingly taking control of their music, their narratives, platforms that exist that empower the artists to bypass the system entirely. Even though that is not necessarily exactly what we have right now, because the system is so intertwined, there are gaps that underground up-and-coming talent can find themselves in, to where they don't have to directly, especially in the early stages, participate in promoting the prison industrial complex. Ownership means freedom. Freedom to tell real stories that uplift communities and to reclaim the culture. We as practitioners and consumers hold immense power. By supporting independent artists, questioning harmful narratives, and demanding accountability from music labels, we can reshape the future of hip-hop. The industry profits from the pain of people's struggles. But hip-hop was never meant to exploit. It was meant to heal, to unite, and to inspire. Is there a way for it to get back to that? The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. A significant portion of these men and women that are housed in private prisons. Corporations that make billions of dollars annually by keeping their cells full. Who profits? Investment firms and corporations with stakes in these prisons. The United States incarcerates more people per capita than any other nation. At the heart of this crisis are private prisons, these companies that have turned incarceration into big business. These corporations often enter agreements with states and local governments that guarantee occupancy rates, sometimes as high as 90%. This means prisons must stay full for these companies to meet their profit goals. How do they ensure this? By lobbying for policies that criminalize minor offenses, increasing sentencing limits, and maintaining the systemic inequalities that lead to their incarceration in the first place. Who benefits from this system? Investment firms and corporations with stakes in private prison companies like Core Civic, GEO Group. These firms aren't just passive shareholders, they actively influence legislation to protect their bottom lines. But it doesn't stop there. Many of these investment firms also have stake in major media and music companies, creating a web of influence that extends far beyond the prison walls. Now think about this. The same entities profiting from mass incarceration are deeply invested in the narratives pushed by hip-hop. The glamorization of crime, violence, and incarceration aligns with their interests. When artists normalize these themes, they reinforce the conditions that lead to higher incarceration rates, ensuring a steady supply of men and women that could be incarcerated. It's a chilling cycle driven by profit and perpetuated by systemic neglect. Private prisons and their investors spend millions lobbying for tough on crime policies. These policies disproportionately target low-income communities, the same communities that form the foundation of hip-hop culture. Meanwhile, the music industry, driven by its own profit motives, amplifies these narratives, creating a feedback loop that benefits the very system that is putting its foot on the neck of these communities. This isn't just a financial issue, it's cultural. The glorification of prison life and street violence impacts how young people see themselves and their futures. It normalizes a cycle of struggle, trapping communities in systemic poverty and oppression. And while the culture suffers, the corporations profit, building wealth on the backs of the very people that they use their stories to represent. This system thrives on ignorance and apathy. By understanding the connections between the private prisons, investment firms, and the music industry, we can begin to have a fuller understanding of what is actually going on. It starts with supporting policies that reduce incarceration, holding music labels accountable for the narratives they promote, and amplifying the voices of independent artists who challenge the status quo. Here's where it gets murky. Many of the same investment firms that back private prisons also own stake in major music labels and streaming platforms. These labels shape the soundtrack of the lives of their listeners, choosing which artists to promote and what stories that get amplified. When music glorifies crime and prison life, it normalizes these experiences for listeners. It reinforces a cycle that benefits the prison industrial complex while exploiting the very communities that it claims to represent. This isn't just a coincidence. It's a part of a broader strategy to control narratives and capitalize on both ends of the pipeline. Music is one of the most powerful tools shaping perception. The stories promoted by major labels don't just entertain, they inform how listeners view themselves and their community. When these stories glorify crime, violence, and incarceration, they do more than just push streams. They reinforce harmful stereotypes. For those already vulnerable to systemic issues, these narratives can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Instead of offering pathways to hope and empowerment, they normalize behaviors that lead straight into the justice system. It's a cycle. Investment firms fund music labels which amplify narratives that glorify the street life. These narratives influence behaviors, increasing incarceration rates, which in turn boost the profits of the private prisons, profits that flow right back into the same firms. Meanwhile, the people and the culture suffer. Communities lose potential, families are torn apart, and young people are trapped in a cycle of poverty and imprisonment, all while the system profits. But let's not forget, music labels decide which stories dominate the streaming platforms. The success of an artist often hinges on their ability to fit the mold that the industry creates. And that mold has been carefully shaped to prioritize profitability over authenticity. Artists are often pressured to lean into stereotypes because that's what gets the listeners to pay attention. And that's what sells, unfortunately, often aligns with the interests of those profiting from the incarceration. When the streaming platforms are filled with stories that glamorize incarceration, what happens to the stories of resilience, success, and community upliftment? They're overshadowed, they're marginalized, or they're ignored altogether. Yet, hip-hop's roots lie in the storytelling that empowers, educates, and uplifts. But by focusing on narratives that reflect the full spectrum of life, the culture has a power to heal, inspire, and drive meaningful changes. This isn't just about the music, it's more about the people, and it's about reclaiming a culture. To break the chain, we need to support independent artists who control their stories, challenge the industry to prioritize diverse narratives, and demand accountability from the firms profiting off of the people's pain. At its core, hip-hop is about resilience and rest. By understanding the systems at play, we can disrupt the cycle and reclaim our culture and ensure that future generations inherit empowerment and not exploitation. The intersection of music and mass incarceration, again, is not a coincidence. It's by design. But a great thing about designs can be changed. If you made it to this part of the video, much love. You could have watched any video on YouTube, but you decided to watch this one. As always, may this reach you up, happy, and healthy. If you heard something today and learned something today that you didn't know yesterday, that's a wonderful thing. Respect and peace in.